Hello, welcome to another round of R&D Live here at Wolfram. Today's presentation is the first in a new format of having developer Q&A. So rather than having a lot of pre-prepared material, we're going to be answering questions from our users and customers and enthusiasts. And so if you're watching us on Twitch or YouTube, feel free to put questions in chat, and those will be relayed to us, and we'll answer them as best we can. And so while people are getting their questions, we had put out a call about a week ago on community.wolfram.com and Stack Exchange, Mathematica Stack Exchange, for questions ahead of time. And so we'll go ahead and start with one of those. And so I'm going to start with an easy question, which is coming from Mathematica Stack Exchange, and looks like it was from Tanner Legvold. He had a bunch of questions, and I'm going to pick the easiest of them, which is a setting for plot or a desire for a plot so that the text will scale with the size of the graphic. And so there is a way of doing this, and it's fairly simple, but not the most prominently displayed thing. So I'm going to share a notebook. So we'll get a notebook going here. And so, as I'm sure everybody's sort of aware, if I do a plot of just something relatively simple, plot sine of x goes from 0 to 10, and I'm going to bump up my magnification just because I don't know what resolutions everybody's at. And so we have our plot, we have our text on the, the text here is tick labels. So let's go ahead and add some more text. We'll add a plot label at the top. And we'll add axes labels. And we'll call the x-axis A's and the y-axis Z's. And so now, as I resize the plot, the area obviously changes, the size of the curve changes, but the text is all staying the same size. And that may not be what you want. I mean, especially if you're doing like a presentation, you may want the text to increase in size along with the plot. And so what I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to add a plot theme that is called not what I'm thinking it is. So let's just go down to the big list at the bottom. And it is not with labels, it is with size scale. And the fact that I couldn't remember the name off the top of my head is proof that I didn't prepare this ahead of time. And so here now we have our same looking plot basically, and as I make it smaller, the text gets smaller. As I make it bigger, the text is getting bigger. And really what this is doing under the hood, for the people who don't want to set a whole theme for this, perhaps, is this is setting, I believe, the label style goes to a scaled setting, And I'm just going to pick a number between 0 and 1 right now, which is almost certainly not what the default is. That's not too far off, I don't think. And there's a reason that we put this in a theme. So here we are. So now we're using a scaled font size, and the text is changing size with us as we resize the graphic. And let's see. So that is, the first question that, from sort of ahead of time. And there are lots of themes, and there's a long list of them. They're pretty well documented on the plot theme page. So that's not being shared at the moment, but I can switch to that. Yeah, so if we look at the documentation for plot theme, we have sort of the main big themes, and then we have a lot of more targeted feature themes farther down. So stuff to do with how we do axes and frames and grid lines, color-based stuff, labels, sort of size related things, and that's where size scale is. And so right, so this is not up, it's not just the label theme, because it also toggles things like point size and line thickness to also scale as you resize the graphics. And then even more specialized types of things that may pertain to only a certain set of visualization functions. And so now we will move on to our next question, and I'm going to put Matt on the spot a little bit. So this is coming from Jonathan Schock on YouTube. What's the best way to set up animations such that they work smoothly on the cloud? So I'm going to stop sharing, and if Matt wants to share, or if he just wants to expound, go for it.
Yeah, I just saw that question. Best way is, it's kind of a broad question. And the good news is we're just making it faster. We're working on improving graphics render times and all that. Obviously, the smoothest is going to be just a straight up GIF. You could export to a GIF if you just want something that's just looping. You're gonna and you can embed that in your page. Otherwise, simplifying the graphics, getting things that can render more easily directly in the browser. It's a little hard to talk in generalities without a specific example, though.
So Matt, are there things that are more likely to, or are there things that you would suggest maybe avoiding in terms of having things that will render quickly in the browser, or?
Obviously, the more complicated if you have a thing with 10,000 points, it'll be laggier than something with 100 points. Simplifying there.
Or I mean, I guess one question. So I know I am not an expert on cloud graphics. I know just enough to be dangerous. So there are some things that we sort of render some semi directly in the in the notebook in the cloud, and then there's things where we go, okay, no, I'm just going to ask the go off and have the front end render it as a bitmap and display that. And are what's the timing difference in those cases, or what sorts of things might cause bitmap rendering? Or
yeah, there's sort of three modes of graphics rendering in the cloud. And we're working on doing a better job of exposing this to the end user so you can understand which way your graphics will be rendered more easily. But it's either rendered just natively in the browser, just like it would be rendered on desktop, but that the computation is actually done in the browser. Or it's done server side, what we call helper data, that uses a desktop front end running on the server side to create an SVG, or it does it gets rasterized server side, and then that's the fallback to bitmap option. But we haven't done a good job yet exposing which way is which to the user. If you want to get into really nitty gritty of it, you can, examine if you're familiar with some web development stuff, you can examine the output graphic and see where it's coming from. But beyond that, we're working on improving that story.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Let's see. So from Twitch, we have a question. Are there plans to support more complicated plots in the row and panel, in the row and column type panel layouts? So for example, filling between curves and additional sorts of things. And there are absolutely plans to support more complicated layouts. So I will go back to sharing, and once I figure out where the notebook I want to share went. And so like as a simple, let's do list line plot, say. So this is newer functionality that maybe not everybody has used yet. So I'm going to create a list line plot, and I'm going to have 4 curves, and each of them is going to have 100 points, say. And so normally that is just 4 curves, right? Yes. And so normally you get all the curves displayed on the same set of axes, and so a while back, as an alternative, we added the ability to say plot layout goes to row. And so this is then going to do it as 4 plots, all done in a row, or I can say row 2. So I'm going to do 2 rows and get a 2x2 grid. And in these cases, then we get some shared axes. And at the moment, when you're using a multi-panel layout like this, each function or each data set is going to get put in its own panel. And so then the question is, is there a plan to do more complicated things? So, could I do this as a row of 2 panels where the first panel has the first 2 plots and the second panel has the third and fourth plots? And there's no immediate plan to do that. But when we were doing, constructing the design for this, some of the choices on what the design is were absolutely done in anticipation that eventually we would have additional syntaxes that would allow having multiple curves per panel, or possibly needing to set an option for one panel or the other a bit differently from some of the others. So it's sort of on our big wish list of expanding that out. And so this is an area where, we've taken, sort of the first step in this, along the path, and then we'll come back later and take some additional steps and continue improving things out. But at the moment, we're letting people get familiar with this, and then to some extent waiting for there to be sort of enough demand for people wanting the additional complications and additional functionality to spend the effort implementing it. So. And let's see. And just taking a peek at comments real quick. And so I think there's a follow-up. Right. And so, the other way to do this, of course, is to create the individual plots separately and combine them with like graphics row or graphics grid. And there are some things that graphics row and graphics grid can't do at the moment that like list line plot with plot layout set can, just because of when you're using plot layout within list line plot or one of the other visualization functions, it sort of knows at an earlier state that you want to do this, that you're creating a panel. And so for example, in this case, we're sharing the axes. So we have sort of one set of ticks that applies to this entire row, and then one set of ticks that applies to this entire row. And that's not as easy, and it knows that it's going to do that early on, and so it can sort of prepare for that and whatnot. Whereas if you're coming at this from a graphics grid approach, it's a bit more effort on your part to make sure the plot ranges are synced up and turn the frames on or off on the respective edges. And so graphics row, graphics grid provide a way of doing this, especially if you want to mix things that aren't necessarily coming from the same function. But it's going to be a bit more work on your part, and graphics grid and graphics row have their own tricky parts to work with. And the good news is that I think some of those parts in terms of how things look and how things work will get be getting some attention near term, so that graphics grid is not such a painful, it's not so much work to use graphics grid to create these types of layouts. So thank you. And let's see. And so I'm going to fall back on a question that was asked on Stack Exchange recently, where somebody was wanting to know, they had seen in Stephen's blog post about the release of version 13.1 about the addition of dollying to 3D graphics. And so I was thinking maybe we would have James take us through dollying and what the difference is between that and zooming.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll share my screen. How's that? Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay, so currently we have a set of 3D navigation, like you can rotate a 3D graphic. You can zoom by pressing command. As you interact or use the various 3D interactions, the cursor will change. So this is the zoom cursor, for instance, and this is the typical rotation cursor. So there's rotation, which is basically just click and dragging on a 3D graphic. If you move your cursor to the kind of a circular region on the outside of the graphic, you can tilt your graphic. So those are the typical useful ones. So what zooming does here, and this will kind of, I need to explain this to contrast it against panning. So zooming here, for instance, is adjusting the view angle. If we looked at the underlying expression here, you'd see if we go into zoom it here, it's 0.45. And if we zoom out, it's going to adjust the view angle option. And so the difference with this and panning is zooming changes the camera's view angle, but panning actually allows you to, dolling. So dolling allows you to move your camera forward or in towards the 3D graphic. So at the moment, you can see my viewpoints out here. And then if I dolly, I press Shift, Command and Shift, and I get this cursor, which has kind of got a forward-backward arrow. And it'll give you a similar effect to viewing, but what's actually happening is you're moving inside the graphic. Like if I rotate now, I'm actually inside the sphere, and I can move through the sphere, for instance, where zooming, for instance, you'll never be able to actually move inside or through the sphere. You've just enlarged it. So dolling, you can see, if I look at my viewpoint now, I can move it like right inside the into the box, for instance. And if I dolly out, I've changed the coordinates. So dolling changes the actual coordinates of the camera. It changes the viewpoints value. Zooming changes the view angle. And what we've also added is, so we've got rotate around, which allows you to rotate around the box. But then there's another 3D interaction we've introduced where you can actually look around. And this one is Alt and Command. And if you click on that, you can actually look around a scene. So here, I'm not just rotating around the scene. I'm actually changing the view center around the viewpoint. Maybe something that's going to also help a lot with visualization, which I'll touch on later, is we are actually going to introduce a Wolfram function repository function to help you better understand the different properties of a visualization. So I think if I did this and I did this, I can actually obtain a visualization of the different viewing parameters, it'll basically give you a graphic which displays where the camera is in relation to the plot range, which you can see down here, and the view frustum, which corresponds to your view range, the view angle. So we're going to introduce a Wolfram function library to help better understand the various view parameters for 3D graphics. So I don't know if that'll update. It's a work in progress, but just to summarize, the different functions are dolling the camera allows you to actually move the viewpoint in relation to it moves the viewpoint, so you can actually move inside a box, or you're moving the camera in the 3D graphic, whereas zooming changes the view angle, and the newer function look around allows you to actually, instead of rotating the viewpoint around the view center, you're actually rotating the view center around the current viewpoint, which allows you to basically, like in a third person shooter game, first person shooter game, you'd be able to look around and strafe your head and so on. Yeah. So just to say, when we release this visualize 3D view function, where it'll be a function where you can plug in an arbitrary graphic expression, and so for instance, here I've got one with neutral lighting, and if I plug that into visualize 3D view, it will render what that looked like, what a visualization of that. These little arrows on the outside are just illustrate the ambient lighting and their color. It's a gray color. And then you can see for the neutral lighting, those little arrows at the bottom. Let me make it a bit bigger. And these arrows at the bottom illustrate the directional lights in the scene. So they're kind of 3 gray directional lights looking onto the scene. You can see your viewpoint, the plot range, the view range, which is where this plane is and that plane. You can see the view center, the view vertical. So it'll just provide a useful graphical depiction to help better understand the viewing parameters. And we're also hoping to build this into an attached cell. So if you have a 3D graphic, you'll just be able to use the attached cell to get to this internally. And the function repository is just under, if you look for Wolfram function repository, you'll be able to get that. And this will probably go under visualization and graphics.
Okay. Do you know when to expect it in the function repository?
We're going to release 13.2 or freeze 13.2, and it'll probably come in a little bit after that. So I would say October,
Okay.
towards the end of October.
Okay. And let's see. So the I'm going to go back to one of the questions that was pre-asked on Stack Exchange, which was another part of the question from from Tanner from the first question. Was wanting some sort of visualization tool to allow you to make quick changes to a plot without having to re-execute. And you know, in particular, they were talking about like adding labels to things. And so there's a lot of ways of changing plots after the fact. And you know, again, I think, you know, there's things that not everybody knows about all the time. And so in terms of adding labels, I mean, one possibility of doing this is, you know, has actually been in the suggestions bar for a long time. I mean, I will admit that I don't usually have the suggestions bar enabled when I'm using Mathematica. But so if I do plot of, oh, let's not do sine, let's do cosine for a change. You know, and I decide that I want to add labels to this. There is a labels option here, you know, among other things, that brings up a selector that allows me to set some of the traditional labels, at least. You know, so I can put a plot label on. So this is okay, so that was my awesome plot. So we'll make this my other awesome plot. And we'll use capital A's for the x-axis and capital Z's for the x-axis or for the y-axis. And I'm gonna make these kind of big, and we will make it. I changed that one. Oh, it's there. We'll pick a blue color for the label style. And so as I'm editing, as I'm filling stuff in here, I'm getting a preview of what it will look like. I hit done. And then it shows me what it did and how it combined it using show. So my axes label and my plot label and my label style, all done here. So if I want to incorporate this into how I constructed the plot, I can grab these and copy and paste them into my original command, or I can still use show to do it, to do the modification. And so that's one possibility. Another possibility for sort of more free-form types of annotations of plots is if I select this, I can come up to the canvas tool in the new toolbar, and then that will toggle it to a thing, and so I can pick an arrow and we'll make that red, and see if I draw the arrow the right way. There we go. Let's increase the thickness on that line. That arrow is distorted for some reason. I wonder what's going on there. Just that is interesting. I haven't seen that before. But in general, I mean, you can use this to annotate things. So, okay, we'll highlight it by, draw a green circle around it instead. Move to where we can select this and drag it, and I guess it was getting into trouble because I was drawing off the top of it was closer than it looked like to the top of the plot range. So again, we'll make that thicker. And then when I'm done, I can use this button in the toolbar again to toggle it back from an editable canvas to an actual normal graphic. And so then this is actually going to allow me to do something else as well. So I'm going to invoke canvas manually because I don't remember if there's a way of doing this through the toolbar. So if I do canvas of, let's see if this will work. %60. We got our plot again. I'm a glutton for punishment, so I'm going to try drawing an arrow again. So I did not get it into the way that I wanted. Oh, I have arrowheads at both ends. I forgot I had turned that on at one point. So in any case, there is a way. Oh, that's what I wanted. I wanted this. So canvas, if you give it a graphic as the first argument, edits the graphic. It is actually editing the graphic. As an alternative, you can do a canvas and specify what the background is. And so then in this case, arrow 3rd times the charm. Here I can draw over the whole thing, including outside of the plot range. And so what it's doing in this case is it's constructing an overlay that is the same size as the graphic, and I'm drawing in that overlay. And so then I'm not restricted to the plot, the editable plot range portion of the graphic. So I can get up here where the plot labels, where plot label and axes labels are. And overlay is the method that's used when you have non-graphical things with a canvas. So I'll be extreme and try this and see if I get into big trouble. So reformatted a little bit when I did this input cell, but now I can, let's do freeform. I can scribble out what the parameters of that were. And now if I toggle this back, that's fun. Not sure what I had selected there. Ooh, all kinds of excitement. Ooh, nesting canvases. I should stop now. Probably not best to have done that with an input cell, but overlay allows you to annotate and mark up other things and sort of draw on top of them if you would like. So let's see. So there's questions about multi-axis arrangement, which was added, I believe, in version 13.0. Maybe 13, I think it was 13.0. And so that is an option for the list plots right now. So if we have our set of curves again, and I'm going to do table. Accumulate. I plus 1. We'll do 20 of those. I comma 3 should be enough. Actually, let's get rid of the accumulates. Okay. So here we have 3 curves. I can say multi-axis arrangement goes to all. And now we get all of them displayed on, sort of in the same panel, but each with their own scale. And the question is how to do labels for these, how to do the axis labels for these. And that is actually going to come from the plot labels option at the moment, at least. So if we say 1 is going to be the blue one, and 2 is going to be the yellow one, and 3 is going to be the green one, then we see we get a label on the green one on the right that says 3, and the other 2 are labeled 1 and 2. Label on the green one on the right. And so that is the way to do label axis label axis labeling in a multi-axis arrangement plot at the moment. So, and a similar thing happens for the plot layout option that we saw before. So if I were to say plot layout goes to row in this, for these 3 plots, then my plot labels 1, 2, and 3 are used as the panel labels by default. So, and so plot labels is getting a lot of use in the multi-panel, multi-axis realm for identifying the different parts. So, and let's see. And somebody says they like my toolbar, which thank you. I like it too. I don't use as much of it. Parts of it have been added, over the years and do things that I don't necessarily need anymore, but I haven't removed them. But basically it's just a place for me to put buttons that do things that I need to do on a regular basis. And so it's not hard. It's just an attached cell and, with a lot of styling added to it. And the most important part of this toolbar for me is this part right here that tells me which version of Mathematica I'm actually using, because it's quite common that I've got 5 copies of Mathematica running. So, the latest released version, some older versions, a couple of under development versions. And so, but thank you. And so then there's a question about built-in pan and zoom on 2D plots, similar to what we have for 3D. This is something that we've been giving some thought to, and part of the question is how exactly we want to package it, how to enable it, that sort of thing. We have multiple things that have essentially a pan and zoom type interface to them. So obviously 3D has actual pan and zoom. Things like dynamic geographics and dynamic image have implementations of pan and zoom. And so here we have a map, and I can pan it, and I can zoom in on a region, and still pan around. Things like dataset have a way of scrolling through large bits of tabular data. And I think, so the question is, is it a wrapper that goes around a graphic? Is it something that you right click into? Is it something that is just keyboard shortcuts that's always enabled? And these are the sorts of things that we haven't necessarily figured out how we want to go about it and whatnot. But this is also a place where the cloud team has been experimenting, sort of independently from people who work primarily on the desktop interface. And so I'm going to stop my share and let Matt share for a bit.
Yeah, I'll show we have an experimental pan and zoom in cloud currently. Undocumented, definitely subject to change, but it is there. It's this method, interactive controls, zoomable, and then the toolbar tells you whether or not you have this toolbar to control pan and zoom. But it's just a graphics level pan and zoom. But you can pan and zoom. So it doesn't recompute things. So like this plot, like you could zoom in to see some more detail there. It gives you a static zoom out, but you see it doesn't recompute past the end of the original plot. But if you, for things where it's just like a complicated graphic and you want to look more detail in it, this could be the current option. It's only cloud for now.
Thank you, Matt. Let's see. So we have a question on, for geographics, whether there is a way to style the geoscale bar, which I don't think there is at the moment. And I'm trying to remember, I think it's the case that hopefully it's a little bit intelligent. So it's black by default, and I think, if I'm not imagining, if I switch to satellite, no, that's still horrible. That's still black. I'll have to think if there's a way to change the style on that. And I mean, I think at one point we were thinking of having a separate option that, sort of gave the whole, would provide a whole range of ways of customizing the scale bar in geographics. But I don't think it's been exposed or fully, filled out yet. So, certainly, send a request to support at wolfram.com and they will add it to the database of things to work on. And then there was another question I saw, which I have forgotten. So there's a question on if there's any plan on adding axis breaks. And so that is also on a list, I mean, it's, there are lots of pieces of functionality that we want to add that we know people want, in terms of graphics and visualizations to add support for. And axis breaks is certainly one of them. And it's sort of interesting that, so in the past couple versions, I think, we've been doing more work around scaling functions. So in sort of two different pushes of that. So one is adding scaling function support to more and more of the visualization functions. And so I think at this point I don't know if I think it's about 80% of the visualization functions support scaling functions. And so that's, so that's been one push. And then the other push has been sort of expanding the concept of scaling functions beyond, just log, type scales and reverse, to being able to do date-based scaling functions or categorical, using the scaling functions framework to deal with categorical data, and allow that to work in more visualization functions. And I think scaling functions is actually one of the building blocks that you want or need to support scale breaks, because you can imagine it working by specifying a scaling function that basically takes jumps. So it goes from 0 to 10 over a nice region, and then from 10 to 100 is a very short region, and then 100 to 110 is back to a nice region again. And scaling functions provides the mechanism to convey that information to axes so that the ticks get generated in an appropriate way. Drawing the actual break on the axis would be something a little bit extra, but not, I think, too difficult. And I mean, the thing I'll point out is that Wolfram Alpha has actually had a form of scale breaks for quite a while. And so I'm going to see if I can. Okay, where'd my share button go? That looks like Zoom. Share screen. Okay, so if I go to Wolfram Alpha, and let's see if I can quickly find an example. Right, so here is a plot of the US population over the past 50 years, I guess. And so it has scale breaks here to indicate that this scale isn't going all the way down to 0. And so in some sense, this is the simplest case. We know, I mean, we aren't cutting out a region in the middle of anything. So all of our data is above the scale break. So it's not the case where we're going from A to B, taking a big jump, and then going from C to D. And so the tick labeling is a little bit easier. And because we know that all the data is above it, in this case, it's able to, I mean, it doesn't really have to deal with the case of what happens for, where the scale, where the data crosses the scale break. How does that get represented? Does it get compressed? Does it get cut out? Depending on which way, you went, it would do, you might have to add additional functionality of one form or another. But there's a few other things that, as scaling functions becomes ubiquitous, that's like, we could implement, this feature with scaling functions, basically, or with the scaling functions mechanism, even if we don't say that it's scaling functions. And axis breaks is definitely one of them. It's just a question of how we want to package it and when we're going to have time to work on it, that sort of thing. So, but I mean, and what we want the aesthetics to look like. So, but I mean, I think that was a great question. Let's see. Please explain this. And I need to switch my share. And this is probably an example of me making a poor choice in trying something that I haven't tried yet. List line plot, frame label ABC. So, one part of this is a bug, which I intend to fix for the next version, which is the fact that the A's are duplicated along the bottom here. So the individual plots here shouldn't have the A's. There, I think, should just be one A for the whole thing. And as for the ABC, being A being down here and B being on this axis and C going on this axis, this is basically a deprecated syntax for frame label. And so let's do frame goes to true so that frame label actually has something to work on. Oh, hey. That's maybe a bug also. Just graphics. Okay. So this is gonna, feed into the rest of my answer, which is that this was, so frame label goes to ABC was the pre-version 6 syntax for putting frame, yes, so we'll put D here as well. And so pre-version 6, you specified frame label and actually all the frame specifications clockwise starting at the bottom. So your first setting would go here, and then second, third, fourth. Starting in version 6, this got swapped to a left, right, bottom, top type syntax. So this would be the equivalent thing would be, for the left, for the right, for the bottom, and for the top. And so, so this is the old syntax. It is one of those things that isn't always accounted for when people are doing more modern development. Remembering 15-year-old syntaxes that aren't documented anymore. And so it's it sometimes gets overlooked a little bit. But I strongly encourage people to use the newer documented forms for frame options, because they're the documented settings and are generally much better supported. So, and let's see. It is now been about an hour. There are lots of questions that we weren't able to get to, and I encourage people to continue to ask questions on community or Mathematica Stack Exchange. If you have feature requests or things that you think are bugs, by all means send them into support, and they will make their way to us. But I think we'll go ahead and stop here, and if there's enough demand, if you enjoyed this, let us know. Upvote the community post about it, and I think we'd like to do this for other areas and other teams as well. So thank you all for attending, and those of you who are coming to the Wolfram Tech Conference, we hope to see you there, and feel free to say hi, and we'll talk to everybody later. Thanks.